All right, let's jump right in. Something truly massive is happening in tech and finance right now. It's like a tidal wave of cash, and it's all flowing into one place: artificial intelligence. Today, we're going to break down how this AI gold rush is literally reshaping our future, $1 billion deal at a time.
So let's start with the headline number, the big one. In 2024 alone, venture capitalists have poured over $100 billion into AI startups around the world. And just to be super clear, that's not the value of these companies. That's fresh, hard cash being invested in a single year. I mean, it's just a wild figure that tells you everything you need to know.
And to really put that number into perspective, check this out. A full 1/3 of all venture capital money for every kind of startup on the planet is now chasing AI. Think about that for a second. For every $3 an investor puts into a new company, one of those dollars is going straight into an AI venture. It's completely dominating the conversation.
And this isn't some slow, gradual trend. It's an explosion. As you can see right here, the total investment in AI shot up by a massive 80% from just last year. What we're seeing is one of the fastest, most concentrated shifts of capital in, well, modern history. It's just incredible.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, a little weird even. Even with all this money flooding in, the actual number of deals being done has dropped to a 10-year low. So, what's going on? Well, it means fewer companies are getting funded, but the ones that do get a check are getting absolutely enormous ones.
So there's actually a name for this phenomenon. It's called the flight to quality. You see, in a shakier economy with higher interest rates, investors get a lot more cautious. They're not just scattering their bets around anymore. Instead, they're piling huge amounts of cash into the companies they see as the safest bets, the ones with proven tech and a really clear shot at making a ton of money.
So, the big question is, where is all this money actually going? Let's start with a really critical one, healthcare. A huge chunk of this capital is flowing right where AI and medicine meet, all with the goal of funding a healthier future for every single one of us. And it's not just one thing either. AI is being used across the entire medical world. We're talking about discovering new life-saving drugs in a fraction of the time it used to take, powering diagnostic tools that can spot diseases like cancer way earlier, and, maybe just as important, automating the crushing paperwork that leads to doctor burnout.
Let's look at a super practical example of that last point. You know, one of the biggest complaints you hear from doctors is just the insane amount of time they spend on paperwork instead of, with patients. So startups are building AI that just listens to the doctor-patient conversation and automatically writes up all the clinical notes.
And if you want to see just how much investors believe in a simple, practical solution like that, look at this. Abridge, a startup that does exactly that, automating clinical notes, just raised a massive $250 million funding round. This isn't science fiction. It's a real solution to a real problem, and it's attracting serious money.
So here's the bottom line. Investors are willing to pay way more for healthcare companies that have AI baked into their DNA. This 83% premium, it shows this incredibly strong belief that AI isn't just a cool feature, it's a fundamental competitive advantage that makes a company worth a whole lot more.
Okay, so from the health of our bodies, let's shift gears to the health of our planet. Because another huge area getting a piece of this AI investment pie is the fast-growing world of climate tech, where people are using AI to try and build a more sustainable world.
In this space, AI is being thrown at some of our biggest environmental challenges. We're talking about everything from creating super smart platforms that help companies track their carbon footprint, to developing new tech that can literally pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, to optimizing our power grids to squeeze every last drop out of renewable energy.
For example, take carbon accounting. For a huge company, the biggest chunk of their carbon footprint, we're talking over 80%, comes from their supply chain. It is a massively complex data nightmare. So platforms like CarbMe are using AI to untangle that whole web, letting companies finally measure and manage emissions they couldn't even see before.
Okay, so we've seen how much money is flowing in and where it's going. But the big question is why? Why is all of this happening right now? Well, it turns out there are about 5 key things that have all come together to create this perfect storm for AI investment. Let's quickly break them down. First is the picks and shovels play. Like in a gold rush, sometimes the smartest money isn't on the miners, but on the guys selling the tools. Investors are funding that core AI infrastructure. Second, AI is finally showing a clear return on investment. It's past the hype, it's creating real value. Third, the tech is just more mature. It's way easier for developers to build real apps now. Fourth, new government rules, especially for climate reporting, are basically creating instant markets for these AI tools. And finally, big corporations are jumping in with their own money, terrified of getting left behind.
But as with any gold rush, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are some really big risks lurking just beneath the surface, and it's so important to understand that this whole boom has some potential downsides that investors are watching very, very closely.
There are 5 major red flags to keep an eye on. First, with all this money going into a few giant deals, it could actually starve smaller, innovative startups of the cash they need. Second, the prices being paid for these companies are just sky high, which makes you wonder if it's sustainable. Third, there aren't many companies going public right now, which means there are very few ways for early investors to get their money out, and that's a problem for the whole system. Fourth, the rules and regulations are still being written, creating a lot of uncertainty. And last but not least, there's a massive shortage of the skilled people needed to actually build all this stuff.
So what does this all add up to? Well, we're watching a historic amount of money get pointed at solving some of humanity's biggest problems, from disease to climate change, and the potential is just undeniable. But this boom also concentrates a ton of power and money and carries enormous financial risk. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. This money is building our future, but are we investing in the right one?